Good afternoon. We'll try that again. I'm a former elementary school teacher. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, thank you. I am, as was said, Kimberly Mayfield Lynch. I'm the chair of the education department at Holy Names University, which is in Oakland, California. And as you know, because a lot of you are New Yorkers, your home newspaper proclaimed Oakland the last true bastion of progressivism in the U.S. During the Occupy movement. I am delighted to share this PowerPoint with you on behalf of my colleagues, Dr. William Fred Ellis, and Dr. Kitty Kelly Epstein, who are watching from California. So I am going to talk to you about the struggle for teacher diversity and the edTPA. And what I want to do is invoke the spirit of W.E.B. Du Bois, because he had a lot to say in his lifetime about racism in society and also about the impact of race on education. So he had a lot to say about the Brown versus Board of Education case, and very specifically that we had to desegregate the schools but be mindful of the impact on African American teachers and also the impact on African American students. And I'll talk a lot about African Americans using us as the miner's canary, because if it's not working for African Americans, it's not going to work for Latinos, Asians, or white students either. So one of the things that he said was that African American teachers would lose ground in the teaching force, and that definitely happened. 30,000 African American teachers lost their jobs after desegregation. Another thing that compromised the number of African American teachers was the NTE, the National Teachers Exam. But it was also known as the Negro Elimination Test of Elimination. So communities of color already have a heightened sensitivity to standardized assessments because we've dealt with them in some very critical and particular ways. So my work is around teacher diversity and how to get the teaching force to be more reflective of the students who are educated. And there are many things that prevent teachers of color from getting into the teaching force. So it's not an issue of recruitment because there are a lot of people of color who want to be teachers. And I will talk to you about some reform that we did, progressive reform that we did in Oakland under a very progressive mayor. So the highlights here are basically focusing once again on the wealth gap. And it's been alluded to today in the conversation around how much it costs for the edTPA. But what hasn't been really underscored is the wealth gap. The other thing that hasn't been underscored is the composition of the professorate, which is about 80% monolingual, monocultural. So when people are saying the education profession wants the edTPA, let's unpack that. Who wants the edTPA? If the majority of teachers are white, and we know the education professorate is predominantly white, then it's a lot of white people who want the edTPA, but that's not reflective of what's happening on the ground in communities and what children need from teachers and what communities want from teachers. That is definitely not reflected. So some people call it an education gap or an academic or achievement gap. But we like to look at it in terms of a wealth gap because we know the more money and resources your family has, the more they are able to provide you with test prep and things like that. So when you look at the wealth gap, it's 20-to-1 between white families and African American families and 18-to-1 for European American families and Latino families. So really on the ground what that means, like our colleague who was talking about his school that's mostly working class, even if they get a voucher for $700, if they have to retake it and the voucher doesn't cover it, or as I forgot your name, as Melissa just said, only certain people qualify for Pell Grant and meet the criteria that would qualify them for a voucher. Communities of people from communities of color are typically not going to be able to persist to the end of the testing journey because it costs money. And one sharp example of this result that I have on the PowerPoint is that 72% of students and only 29% of teachers are Latino, Asian, and African American in my home state. Now I know that in other states like your state of New York, Texas, Florida, it's similar. And what we know is that in the nation, children of color are becoming the majority of the children that are being educated in the public schools. So what happens? You know, often when we talk about diversity in the teaching force, it's couched around diversity needs to be there for the diverse populations, and part of that is right. But it also compromises the experience of white teachers if they are the only teachers at a school. So clearly, the tax dollars that are generated from communities of color should go to fund salaries for people from their community. Diverse young people and their families definitely need to have teachers that are part of their community, but not teachers who are visiting their community, touring their community for 2 years as they go on to do what they really want to do. Our communities need stable teachers. And students are deprived of the language-specific knowledge and wisdom and immigration experience and so forth that teachers will bring to the classroom. And if white teachers are not teaching in parity with teachers of color, then they get to create all kinds of scenarios and rationalizations for what's going on in the schools if they're not cultural insiders as well as ethnic insiders. So we've been struggling in Oakland for a long time around a lot of things. At the turn of the last, in the 1950s, we had a full-scale strike, a major strike that brought communities of color together around labor practices, specifically highlighting the way women were treated. And that activism has continued to the present day. The Black Panther Party was founded in Oakland, and we have been struggling around issues of education for a long time. So in 1996, teachers and students at my home institution, Holy Names, rallied against the implementation and the delivery of the California Basic Education Skills Test. And while it wasn't overturned, we were able to speak truth to power and say that the way the test was delivered preferenced people who had English as their first language, and it also preferenced people who could segment their thinking into 3 parts for 3 distinct periods of time. What we said is that people should be able to use the entire time allotted for the test to take one area of the test. And even though that makes it more expensive, we found that people who have English as their second language were better able to get through the test in that way, so they could spend all their time on the reading part, for example, and not be rushed through. So we've already had some experience around resisting standardized assessment. One of the ways that we've created a very diverse teacher candidate pool at my institution, and in fact, about 70% of our candidates are from African American, Latino, and Asian backgrounds, and 4 of our 6 full-time tenure-track faculty members are also from African American and Latino backgrounds. So one of the ways that we were able to do this with our teacher candidates is to eliminate the CBEST that I just talked about as part of the requirement for getting admitted to the teaching credential program. We've also done that elimination for CSET, which is akin to the Praxis, and those two. So when we do that, we get a more diverse pool to matriculate through our credential program, and clearly, in order to earn your credential, you have to have passed those tests. And so what we found is that once people are in the program and they get educated about the history of racism and standardized assessments, it gets them angry enough to declare war on them and to pass them. So we can say that it hasn't compromised the quality of teachers by eliminating those tests for entry. And then another thing that happened in the 1990s is that Dr. Fred Ellis was able to start an Oakland partnership program with Cal State East Bay, and about 300 diverse teachers were graduates of that program, and that's Dr. Ellis. And what has happened is they got their teaching credentials, and then they moved up the educational ladder, so they became school leaders, and now a lot of them are principals and some work in the central office. And why that's important is because they understand the necessity for a diverse teaching force, and that the criteria sort of swirling around is not necessarily what needs to be completed prior to getting into a teaching program. So we're really proud of those people who are still in the profession. The next thing that we did do in Oakland, and this is something that communities who are struggling for ways to really resist, is to get people who get a lot of press and media to talk about this issue. So one of the things we did is we recruited former Congressman Ron Dellums to run for mayor of the city of Oakland in 2006, and he is a former Oaklander. He was raised in Oakland. So it was a true grassroots effort. About 9,000 people signed a petition asking him to run. And he said, I won't run if only the African American community wants me to run. I really need to know that it is a coalition of people who believe in my leadership. And so we were able to get him elected. And one of the things he did, which was very different than what mayors usually do, is he asked the community, what do you think needs to be done? And sort of distilled that into 3 to 5 points. And those points became his mayoral platform for the rest of his term. And so the way that happened was through 41 community task forces, and 8 of them were focused on education. I had the opportunity to lead the Effective Teachers for Oakland Task Force. And the goal of my task force was to identify ways to recruit and retain local Oaklanders who reflect the diversity of the students who were willing to make a commitment to the schools. And what we were able to do with that effort is, through a partnership with the Oakland Unified School District, create a program called Teach Tomorrow in Oakland. And what TTO does is it recruits local people. It asks them to make a 5-year commitment to Oakland, not a 2-year, not a 3-year, because we know teachers reach mastery after their 3rd year. They begin to feel mastery after their 3rd year. TTO has had no trouble at all recruiting people. The problem is getting through the standardized assessments, and that's what we see the edTPA as, is another standardized assessment. This is Dr. Rochelle Rogers-Ard, who is the director of TTO, and Kelly Leonard, who is her program assistant. So you can see it says Be Inspired. It has quite an Oakland flavor, and to date, TTO has placed 87 teachers in the Oakland Unified School District. So the National Association of Multicultural Education has taken up the struggle for teacher diversity. It has become one of their major initiatives. And so far, 2 conferences have been held. There's a book that's coming out shortly that has several chapters that describe how different communities have approached the teacher diversity issue. And then the second part is that NAME has passed a resolution against the edTPA, and I'm going to give it to you. And so just to highlight, because there were questions about what can be done, there are specific directives for teacher educators, teachers and school administrators, student teachers, parents, and community members on this position statement. And so I would encourage you to read it, and that which resonates with you, do that, and then to share the position statement with your colleagues. And in closing, I have another paper for you, which is just a list of references.